We went into the house and I immediately noticed other details that didn't fit with the story of financial difficulties. The living room had been recently redecorated. The furniture wasn't the same as I remembered from my last visit. There was a new leather sofa that looked expensive, a glass coffee table that gleamed impeccably, and several decorative objects that were definitely not cheap. On the wall was a large flat-screen TV that hadn't been there before. It was a recent model, one of those that cost several thousand. How could a family in a financial crisis explain the purchase of a luxury television? "Dad, look who came to visit," Sienna called towards the inside of the house. Leonard appeared from what seemed to be the kitchen, wiping his hands with a towel. When he saw me, his expression changed slightly. There was a flicker in his eyes, as if for a moment he had seen something he didn't expect, but he quickly regained his usual smile. "Adeline, so good to see you," he said, approaching to greet me. "We hope you're hungry because Sienna has prepared a delicious meal." It was the same Leonard I had seen at the grocery store just an hour before, but now he was acting as if he hadn't left the house all day. His clothes were the same, but he had put an apron over his shirt, as if he had been cooking. "I brought a cake to go with it," I said, handing him the box. "I hope you like it." "What a lovely gesture," Sienna exclaimed. "But it wasn't necessary, Adeline. You know you're always welcome here without having to bring a thing." As she spoke, I could see over her shoulder into the kitchen. The counters were full of ingredients and utensils that suggested an elaborate culinary preparation. I could make out expensive-looking cuts of meat, fresh and exotic vegetables, and bottles of imported seasonings. The amount of food they were preparing could easily feed a family for several days, and the quality of the ingredients was noticeably superior to what I could afford to buy for my own meals. "Did you two prepare all this?" I asked, genuinely impressed by the abundance. "Well, we wanted to do something special for your visit," Leonard replied. "You don't get to have Owen's mother over every day. Besides, we got some ingredients on sale, so we decided to take advantage." Advantage? The miraculous sales again. I began to wonder if this family had an extraordinary knack for finding deals, or if these explanations were simply a way to justify expenses they couldn't honestly explain. Owen seemed completely oblivious to my observations. He was chatting animatedly with Sienna about his job and his plans for the next week. His relaxed attitude confirmed that he really believed the version of reality they had presented to him. But I could no longer ignore the evidence before my eyes. Every detail of that house, every aspect of Sienna's and Leonard's appearance, every convenient explanation, everything pointed to the same unsettling conclusion. This family was not going through the financial difficulties they claimed to be facing. During lunch, I tried to maintain a normal conversation while discreetly observing every detail that could confirm or disprove my suspicions. The table was set with dinnerware I didn't remember seeing before. Plates and glasses that seemed to be of good quality, not the kind of utensils someone worried about every penny would use. The food they served was abundant and varied. There were several main courses, elaborate salads, and side dishes that required expensive ingredients. Leonard poured wine into crystal glasses, a wine I recognized from having seen its price at the grocery store. More than $50 a bottle. "This wine is delicious," I commented, trying to get information. "Is it a special brand?" "Oh, this one," Leonard replied with a proud smile. "A friend of mine who works in imports got it for me at a special price. Normally, we couldn't afford wines like this, but when these opportunities come up, you have to take advantage." There was always a perfect explanation, always a generous friend or an incredible deal that justified every luxury. I was starting to wonder how many generous friends one family could have, and how frequent those extraordinary deals could be. While we ate, Sienna casually mentioned some plans they had for the next month. She talked about a family celebration they were organizing, an event that, as she described it, would require a considerable investment in decorations, food, and entertainment. "Sounds expensive," I said without thinking, my words slipping out. "Expensive?" Sienna laughed. "Well, we've been saving for this for months. Besides, Leonard got an extra job that will help us cover the expenses. I immediately remembered what I had seen at the grocery store just a few hours earlier. Leonard spending money as if he had no worries, buying luxury products, driving a new car. What was the truth about his work situation? What kind of extra job did you get, Leonard? I asked directly. For a moment, I saw an expression of discomfort cross his face, as if my question had caught him off guard, but he quickly regained his composure. Weekend consulting, he replied vaguely. Nothing too exciting, but it helps supplement the family income. His answer was so general it could mean anything or nothing at all. A man who was truly doing weekend consulting would probably talk with more specificity about his work, especially when the question came from his son-in-law's mother. During the conversation, I noticed that Sienna's phone was constantly vibrating. Every time she looked at the screen, she smiled in a way that seemed significant to me. At one point, when she thought no one was watching her, she replied to a message, typing quickly with a look of satisfaction on her face. Everything okay with the phone? I asked with apparent curiosity. Oh, just some friends organizing a get-together for next week, she replied quickly, putting her phone away. You know how women are always planning something. But there was something about her expression that didn't convince me. The way she had smiled while reading the messages suggested that the content was more meaningful than simple social plans. After lunch, Leonard offered to show me some of the improvements they had made to the house. We walked through different rooms, and in each one, I noticed new or renovated elements. The floors had been recently polished, some walls had fresh paint, and several pieces of furniture had been replaced or rearranged. In the master bedroom, I saw something that particularly caught my attention. On top of the dresser were several shopping bags from expensive stores, some still unopened. The price tags I managed to glimpse showed numbers that seemed exorbitant for a family that was supposedly struggling financially. So you went shopping recently? I asked, gesturing discreetly toward the bags. Ah, Leonard replied with a nervous laugh. She found some incredible clearance sales this week. Sometimes it's better to buy things when they're on sale, even if you don't need them immediately. That logic seemed completely contradictory to me. A family that was truly in financial difficulty would not have the luxury of buying things they didn't need immediately, no matter how good the deals were. As we returned to the living room, my phone rang. It was a text message from a number I didn't recognize. When I opened it, I saw that it was from the grocery store cashier. He had gotten my number somehow and had sent me a photo. The image showed a grocery receipt from just 2 days earlier. The total was over $400, and the list included premium products, imported meats, fresh seafood, expensive wines, specialty cheeses, and several gourmet items. The name on the receipt was clearly Leonard Williams. Along with the photo was a message. Mrs. Thorne, I'm sorry to bother you, but I thought you should see this. This receipt is from 2 days ago. Your family needs to know the truth. My heart started beating faster. The evidence was there in black and white. A $400 purchase of luxury goods made just 2 days before our visit by the same man who was supposedly struggling to pay for basic expenses. I quickly put my phone away before anyone noticed my expression of shock, but my mind was already working, connecting all the dots I had been observing over the past few hours. We returned to where Owen and Sienna were, who were still chatting animatedly. My son seemed relaxed and happy, enjoying what he thought was quality time with his in-laws. He had no idea of the theatrical performance he was witnessing. Are you feeling okay, Mom? Owen asked me, probably noticing that my expression had changed. You look a little pale. Just a little tired, I lied. I'm not used to such long outings anymore. Sienna immediately offered to make me some tea, or get me something to make me feel better. Her apparent concern would have been touching if I hadn't been starting to understand the true nature of her character. For the next hour, I continued to observe and listen, mentally collecting evidence of every inconsistency, every inexplicable luxury, every convenient justification. The list grew constantly. Sienna's new clothes, Leonard's car, the well-maintained house, the abundant food, the expensive wine, the shopping bags, the receipt I had received. But what hurt me the most was the realization that this situation had probably been going on for months, maybe years. How much money had my son sent to this family? How many sacrifices had he made? And how many had I made to help people who didn't actually need help? When we finally said goodbye and left the house, my mind was completely made up. I couldn't let this farce continue. My son deserved to know the truth, however painful it was, and I had a responsibility to protect him from further manipulation. During the drive back home, Owen commented on how nice the visit had been and how well Sienna's family looked. His words were like daggers in my heart, because I knew I would soon have to shatter that happy image with a much darker and more disappointing reality. Yes, they look very well, I replied carefully, choosing my words precisely. Maybe too well for a family that's going through such severe difficulties. The drive back home was one of the most difficult of my life. Every mile we drove took me physically away from the house where I had discovered the truth, but brought me emotionally closer to a decision that would change everything for my family. My mind was a whirlwind of contradictory thoughts, doubts, and a growing sense of indignation that I struggled to keep under control. Owen was driving calmly, occasionally whistling a tune that showed his good mood. For him, we had spent a pleasant afternoon with his in-laws, sharing a delicious meal and strengthening family ties. He had no idea that his mother had been collecting evidence of what seemed to be an elaborate and prolonged scam. "Mom," he said as we waited at a traffic light, "I'm so glad to see you get along so well with Sienna's family. I know you had some reservations about our marriage at first, but I think now you can see what good people they are." His words broke my heart. My son, my only son, was being manipulated by people who had turned the exploitation of his generosity into an art. How could I tell him that the people in whom he had placed his trust and his money were probably professional liars? "Owen," I began carefully, "have you ever noticed anything inconsistent in the stories Sienna tells you about their financial situation?" My son glanced at me briefly before returning his gaze to the traffic. "What do you mean, Mom? Inconsistent? How?" "Well," I continued, choosing my words very carefully, "today I noticed they have a lot of new things in the house. The television, some furniture, Sienna's clothes. All of that costs a considerable amount of money." Owen sighed, and I could see that my comment had hit a nerve. "Mom, I already explained that Leonard has been getting extra jobs. Besides, Sienna is very good at finding deals and bargains. Not everything that looks new is necessarily expensive. But don't you think it's strange that a family that needs constant help for basic expenses can afford so many luxuries at the same time?" I insisted, trying to keep my tone neutral and non-accusatory. "They're not luxuries, Mom," Owen replied with a touch of defensiveness in his voice. "They're basic needs they've been able to meet thanks to a lot of effort and sacrifice. They bought the TV secondhand. The furniture was a one-time opportunity, and Sienna's clothes are from clearance sales." Each justification my son repeated was exactly the same one I had heard from Leonard and Sienna during lunch. It was as if they had rehearsed these explanations to perfection, creating a consistent version of reality that could satisfy any uncomfortable question. I decided to try a different approach. "Son, have you seen any receipts or documents that confirm these incredible deals? Or have you accompanied Sienna when she finds these extraordinary bargains?" The question clearly made him uncomfortable. I could see his hands tighten slightly on the steering wheel. "Mom, why all these questions? Sienna is my wife. If she tells me she got something on sale, I believe her. Marriage is based on trust." His answer confirmed what I had begun to suspect. Owen had never seen direct evidence of these supposed deals and extra jobs. He was blindly believing everything they told him because he trusted the people he loved. "Of course, son," I replied softly. "Trust is fundamental in marriage, but it's also important to protect yourself from people who might take advantage of that trust." "Are you insinuating that Sienna and her family are deceiving me?" Owen asked, now clearly annoyed. "Mom, that's a very serious accusation." "I'm not accusing anyone," I said quickly, realizing I had pushed too hard. I'm just expressing some concerns I have as a mother who loves you and wants to see you happy and prosperous." The rest of the trip passed in tense silence. Owen was clearly processing my conversation, but I could see from his expression that my words had created more resistance than reflection. It was evident that any criticism towards Sienna and her family would be received as a personal attack. When we arrived at my apartment, Owen helped me out of the car, but his goodbye hug was colder than usual. "Mom," he said before leaving, "I hope you can give Sienna's family a chance. They're good people who are doing the best they can in difficult circumstances." "I'll keep that in mind, son," I replied, knowing he would interpret my response as a promise to be more understanding when in reality it was the opposite. That night, alone in my small apartment, I sat in my favorite armchair with a cup of tea and tried to organize all the thoughts that had been bombarding my mind for the past few hours. I had abundant circumstantial evidence, testimonies from neighbors, personal observations, and even a photo of the $400 grocery receipt. But I also had a son who was completely convinced that his wife and her family were victims of difficult circumstances who deserved his help and compassion. Any direct attempt to confront this belief had resulted in resistance and defensiveness. I took out my phone and looked at the photo of the receipt the grocery store cashier had sent me again. The numbers were indisputable. Over $400 in luxury goods purchased just 2 days before our visit. That amount represented more than I spent on food for an entire month. As I looked at that evidence, I remembered all the times Owen had come home stressed after working extra hours to send money to Sienna's family. I remembered the occasions when I myself had contributed with my few savings, feeling sorry for their supposed desperate situation. The indignation I had been holding back all day finally began to emerge with force. It wasn't just the money that bothered me, though that was significant. It was the emotional manipulation, the systematic exploitation of my son's good feelings, and the calculated way they had built a web of lies to sustain their lifestyle at our family's expense. It also pained me deeply to realize that they had probably been laughing at us behind our backs. Every time we sent money, every time we worried about their well-being, every time we made sacrifices to help them, they probably saw it as evidence of our naivety and ease of being manipulated. But what tortured me most was the question of what to do with this information. I had the evidence. I had the observations. I had the documented inconsistencies. But I also had a son who would refuse to believe anything negative about his wife without absolutely irrefutable proof. If I acted too quickly or too confrontational, I ran the risk of alienating Owen and pushing him more towards Sienna. But if I didn't act soon, the manipulation would continue, possibly getting worse over time, and my son would continue to be exploited financially and emotionally. I decided I needed more evidence. Evidence that was so clear and indisputable that even Owen couldn't deny or rationalize it. I couldn't rely only on observations and suspicions. I needed concrete proof that would reveal the true nature of the people who had deceived my family. That night, before I fell asleep, I made a decision that would change the course of the events that followed. I would not directly confront Owen until I had absolutely solid evidence. Instead, I would begin my own discreet investigation, collecting proof that was impossible to deny or explain with convenient stories about miraculous deals and mysterious extra jobs. The following days were the most difficult I had experienced in years. Every interaction with Owen had become an exercise in self-control, trying to maintain normalcy while my mind constantly worked on how to address the situation I had uncovered. The evidence I had collected weighed on my conscience like a burden I couldn't share. During that week, I received 3 more messages from the grocery store cashier. Each one contained additional information that confirmed and expanded my initial suspicions. He sent me photos of other receipts for purchases made by Leonard and Sienna in recent weeks, all showing excessive spending on unnecessary and expensive products. One of the photos showed a receipt for over $600, which included 2 bottles of French champagne costing more than $100 each, imported seafood, and several gourmet cheeses. The date on the receipt was the same day Sienna had called Owen asking for urgent help to pay the rent. I also received information from Hermione, one of the women I had heard talking at the grocery store. She had gotten my phone number through a mutual friend and contacted me because she had decided I needed to know more details about the situation. Hermione told me that Sienna's family had been organizing regular parties at their house, events with professional catering and expensive decorations. She described a birthday party for Leonard that had cost, according to the guests' comments, several thousand in food, drinks, and entertainment. "Adeline," she told me during a phone call, "my daughter lives on the same block and tells me that delivery trucks with expensive purchases, clothes, appliances, furniture are constantly arriving. It's not normal for a family that is supposedly in a financial crisis." Each new piece of information made it harder to maintain my silence. But I knew I needed the right moment and circumstances to present all of this to Owen in a way that couldn't be easily dismissed or rationalized. The moment came on a Wednesday night when Owen came to visit me after work. He looked especially tired and stressed. When I asked him what was wrong, he told me that Sienna had asked him for additional money for a medical emergency for Leonard. "He needs a minor surgery," Owen explained, rubbing his temples with clear signs of tension. "The insurance doesn't cover everything, and they need $200 by Friday. I've been working double shifts all week to be able to get the money together." That was the last straw, $200 for a supposed medical emergency requested by the same family that had spent $600 on champagne and seafood just a few days earlier. I couldn't let my son sacrifice himself anymore for these elaborate lies. "Owen," I said, taking his hands in mine, "I need to show you something, but before I do, I want you to know that I'm doing this because I love you and because I can't stand to see you being hurt." I took out my phone and showed him the first photo of the $400 receipt. His eyes widened when he saw the date and the total. But before he could speak, I showed him the other photos I had received during the week. "Mom, where did you get this?" Owen asked, looking at the images with an expression that mixed confusion and denial. "And how do you know these receipts are real?" I explained my encounter with the grocery store cashier, the conversations I had overheard from the neighbors, and all the observations I had made during our visit. I spoke slowly and carefully, presenting each piece of evidence logically and chronologically. "But there has to be an explanation," Owen insisted, although his voice no longer sounded as convinced as before. "Maybe Leonard had a good month at work. Or maybe they received money from another source." "Son," I replied gently, "these luxury purchases were made on the same days that Sienna called you asking for help with basic expenses. Doesn't that seem like too much of a coincidence?" I could see the realization starting to sink into his mind. His eyes moved between the photos on my phone and my face, looking for some way to reconcile what he was seeing with what he had believed for so long. "Besides," I continued, showing him the information I had gotten about the expensive parties, "the neighbors have seen how this family really lives. It's not the story of desperate poverty they've been telling you." Owen got up from his chair and started pacing my small living room. I could see his mind working, recalling past conversations, broken promises, and small inconsistencies that he had probably ignored or rationalized before. "But why would they do this?" he finally asked in a voice that sounded completely defeated. "Why would Sienna lie to me about something so important?" "Because it worked," I replied honestly. "Because you've been sending them money regularly without asking questions, trusting their word. For them, you're a reliable source of additional income that they can use to maintain a lifestyle they couldn't otherwise afford." Tears began to form in my son's eyes. Seeing his pain broke my heart, but I knew it was necessary to free him from this destructive manipulation. "How much money have I given them in total?" he asked, though he seemed afraid of the answer. We had reached the moment of complete truth. "According to what you've told me over the past few months, probably more than $5,000. And that's not counting the help I've given them myself." The number hit him like a physical punch. $5,000 represented months of extra work, personal sacrifices, and lost opportunities for his own future, all given to people who had been systematically deceiving him. "I need to talk to Sienna," he said finally with a determination I hadn't heard in his voice in a long time. I need to confront her with this information and hear her explanation. Are you sure you're ready for that conversation? I asked him. Once you put this information on the table, there will be no turning back. Your relationship will change forever, no matter what her answer is. Owen was silent for several minutes, looking at the photos on my phone over and over again. I could see him processing not only the financial evidence, but also the emotional implications of having been deceived by the person he loved. Mom, he said finally, thank you for showing me this. I know it must have been difficult for you to decide whether to tell me or not, but you were right. I needed to know the truth. I hugged him tightly, feeling both relief and worry about what would come next. The truth had finally come to light. But now came the most difficult part, facing the consequences of years of lies and manipulation. What are you going to do now? I asked. I'm going home tonight, and I'm going to have a very serious conversation with my wife. Owen replied with a firmness he hadn't shown in months. And depending on what she says, I'm going to make some important decisions about our future. Owen left my apartment that night with a determination I hadn't seen in him for months. I stayed awake very late, unable to sleep, wondering how the confrontation between my son and his wife would unfold. I knew the next few hours would be crucial for the future of our family. At 2 o'clock in the morning, my phone rang. It was Owen, and his voice sounded completely different when I answered. There was a mix of pain, anger, and something that sounded like relief. Mom, he said without preamble. You were right about everything, completely. What happened, son? I asked, although from his tone, I could already imagine that the confrontation had not gone well for Sienna. When I got home, I decided to check some things before I talked to her. I went to our room and looked through her things, something I had never done before because I trusted her completely. What I found left me speechless. Owen told me that he had found several shopping bags hidden in the closet, all from expensive stores with receipts that showed hundreds of dollars in expenses for clothes and accessories. He also found jewelry he had never seen Sienna wear, still with their original price tags. But that wasn't the worst part, Mom. In her purse, I found a notebook where she had written down all the money she's asked me for over the past 2 years. Every lie, every emergency, every invented story is documented there as if it were a job. My heart sank when I heard this. The situation was even worse than I had imagined. Not only had they been lying about their financial situation, but they had been keeping a detailed record of their scam, as if it were a legitimate business. And what else was in that notebook? I asked, although I feared the answer. Plans to ask for more money, Owen replied bitterly. She had noted that the next story would be a dental emergency for her mother that would cost $1,800. $1,800. She also had notes on how to make me feel guilty if I doubted her or asked too many questions. The cold calculation of it all sickened me. They weren't mistakes or misunderstandings. It had been a systematic manipulation designed specifically to exploit my son's good feelings. And when did you confront her with all this? I asked. At first, she tried to deny everything, Owen continued. She said the purchases were gifts from friends, that the notebook was just to keep track of household expenses, that I was misinterpreting everything. But when I showed her the photos you had of the grocery store receipts, her strategy changed completely. How did it change? She got furious. She yelled at me that I had no right to go through her things, that my family had never really accepted her, and that it was all your fault for putting ideas in my head. She said, you had always been a meddling mother-in-law who wanted to destroy our marriage. Those accusations hurt, but they didn't surprise me. It was typical of professional manipulators to try to turn the situation around and become the victims when confronted with evidence of their lies. But what impacted me most, Owen continued, was when she finally admitted the truth. She told me that her family had never been in a financial crisis, that Leonard has a stable job that pays well, and that it had all been a strategy to take advantage of my generosity. She used that word specifically, take advantage. Exactly that word, Mom. She said I was easy to convince and that my family had money that we could afford to share, as if we were responsible for maintaining their luxurious lifestyle. The conversation continued for over an hour. Owen told me every detail of the confrontation, every lie that had been revealed, every manipulation that had finally been exposed. The picture that emerged was of a family that had turned deception into a way of life. I also called Leonard during the argument. Owen told me I wanted to hear his version of events. At first, he tried to stick to the original story, but when I told him I already knew the truth, he also admitted everything. And what did Leonard say? He said that they had decided from the beginning that I was a good match for Sienna, because I had a stable job and a family that could help them financially. He told me it was never personal, that it was just business, as if that made everything okay. The coldness of that admission left me speechless. Not only had they deceived my son, but they had seen him from the beginning as a source of income, not as a human being with his own feelings and needs. And what did Sienna say when her father admitted everything? I asked. That was the most revealing part of the whole night. Owen replied with a bitter laugh. She got mad at him for ruining the plan. She wasn't angry because the lies had hurt our marriage, but because her father had confessed and ruined her ability to continue deceiving me. For the next hour, Owen told me how he had discovered more details about the extent of the lies. The supposed medical emergencies had never existed. Leonard's work problems were completely fabricated. Even the incredible deals that explained all their luxuries had a simpler explanation. They simply bought what they wanted with the money my son sent them regularly. What hurts me the most, Mom, he told me toward the end of our conversation, isn't just the money I lost. It's realizing that for 2 years of marriage, I never really knew the woman I married. Everything was an act designed to keep me giving them money. And what are you going to do now, son? I asked him, although from his tone, I already suspected what his answer would be. I've already told Sienna that our marriage is over tonight. There's no way to rebuild trust after such a systematic and calculated betrayal. Tomorrow, I'm going to start the divorce proceedings. Although I knew it was the right decision, my heart ached for my son. No one deserves to discover that the person they love has been so elaborately deceiving them for so long. I also made it very clear that they won't get another cent from our family, Owen continued. And I told her that if they try to contact you asking for help, you should tell them exactly what I think of their methods. Of course, son, I assured him. That family will never again receive help from us. Mom, Owen said before hanging up. Thank you for having the courage to show me the truth. I know it must have been difficult for you to decide whether to tell me or not, especially knowing it would probably destroy my marriage, but you saved me from years more of being used and manipulated. After hanging up the phone, I sat in the darkness of my apartment, processing everything that had happened. The truth had finally come to light, but it had come at a very high cost for my son. His marriage had ended, his trust had been betrayed, and he would have to rebuild his life from scratch. But I also knew that in the long run, the truth would have freed him from a situation that would only have gotten worse over time. Sienna and her family would never have stopped asking for money. They would never have voluntarily confessed their lies, and they probably would have escalated their manipulations until they had completely drained my son's resources. The months that followed that revealing night were a process of healing and rebuilding for our entire family. Owen temporarily moved into a small apartment near his job while he processed the divorce and reorganized his life. I accompanied him every step of the way, offering him the emotional support he needed to overcome the betrayal he had experienced. The divorce process revealed even more details about the magnitude of the deception. Owen's lawyers discovered that Sienna had been hiding significant assets throughout their marriage. She had a secret bank account where she deposited some of the money she received from my son, and had been buying valuable items that she then hid to maintain the appearance of financial need. Mom, Owen told me during one of our weekly meals, the lawyer calculated that over our 2 years of marriage, I sent them more than $15,000. $15,000 that I could have used to buy a house, to invest in my future, or to help you when you needed it. The number deeply impacted me. It represented years of my son's honest work, sacrifice for people who had seen him only as a source of easy income. But what made me most proud was seeing how Owen had matured through this painful experience. During the legal process, Sienna and her family tried to contact me on several occasions. Leonard called me trying to convince me to intercede with Owen, promising that they would return all the money and never ask for help again. His pleas sounded desperate, but I had already learned to recognize their manipulations. Leonard, I told him during the last call I accepted, you had 2 years to be honest with my son. You chose lies, manipulation, and deceit. Now you have to live with the consequences of those decisions. Sienna also attempted a final effort at manipulation by showing up at my apartment one afternoon unannounced. She was dressed in simple clothes and no makeup, trying to project an image of vulnerability and repentance. But I already knew her techniques too well. Adeline, she said with tears that seemed rehearsed, I know we made mistakes, but I really loved Owen. This all got out of control, but we never wanted to hurt him. Sienna, I replied with a calm that surprised me. Real love doesn't include systematic lies and calculated manipulation. What you did wasn't love. It was exploitation disguised as love. She continued to try various approaches. First, the repentant victim, then the desperate wife. After that, the daughter-in-law who just wanted to mend the family relationship. But every strategy she tried only confirmed what I already knew about her true nature. The money you took from my son isn't just money, I explained to her. It represented his trust, his future, and his ability to believe in the people he loves. That can't be returned with apologies or promises. Finally, after more than an hour of failed manipulation attempts, Sienna showed her true colors. Her expression changed completely and she told me coldly, I always knew you were the problem in this marriage. Owen would have been happy if you hadn't meddled. Maybe, I replied calmly, but he would have been happy while being deceived and exploited. I prefer him to be temporarily unhappy, but free than happy but used. After that confrontation, I never heard from Sienna or her family again. According to Hermione, they moved out of the neighborhood a few weeks later, probably to avoid the embarrassment of everyone knowing the truth about their methods. Owen's recovery process was gradual, but constant. At first, he was angry with himself for having been so trusting. But with time and perspective, he began to understand that his generosity and trust were not weaknesses, but valuable qualities that had been exploited by unscrupulous people. Mom, he told me during a dinner near his new apartment, I've been thinking about everything that happened, and I realize I learned something important. Generosity must be accompanied by wisdom, and trust must be earned and maintained, not given blindly. With the money he no longer had to send to Sienna's family, Owen was able to start rebuilding his finances. He opened a savings account, began investing in his professional future, and for the first time in years, he could enjoy small luxuries without feeling guilty. He also helped me improve my own situation. He insisted on giving me money to buy some new appliances I needed, and began visiting me more frequently, bringing good quality food that we could share without worrying about the cost. It's ironic, he reflected one day as we shared a meal he had bought. All this time, I was worried about helping a family that didn't need help, while you, who really could have used more support, never asked for anything. That observation deeply moved me. During the years of Sienna's manipulation, I had watched my son exhaust himself, trying to meet constant demands for money, while I remained silent about my own needs so as not to add more pressure to his life. 6 months after the divorce, Owen had found a new balance in his life. He had learned to be more cautious without becoming cynical, wiser, without losing his ability to trust the people who truly deserved his trust. Mom, he told me during one of our Sunday walks in the park, I want to thank you again for having the courage to show me the truth. I know it was difficult for you to decide whether to intervene or not. Son, I replied, a mother must always protect her children, even when it hurts. My job isn't just to love you, but also to make sure the people you say you love truly deserve you. The grocery store cashier, a man named Eli, also became an unexpected but welcome presence in our lives. One day, he came to visit me to ask how things had turned out, and we ended up talking for hours about the importance of speaking up when we see injustices, even if it's uncomfortable to do so. You know, Mrs. Thorne, Eli told me before he left, my mother went through a similar situation years ago, and no one had the courage to tell her the truth. When everything was finally discovered, she had already lost all her life savings. That's why I decided to talk to you. Some truths hurt, but silence hurts more. Now, when I look back on everything that happened, I feel a mix of pain for what my son had to suffer, but also a deep pride for the strength he showed in facing the truth and making the right decisions. I learned that true family love sometimes requires the courage to speak difficult truths, to confront uncomfortable situations, and to protect the people we love, even when it means destroying illusions they prefer to keep. That day when I heard those strange words at the grocery store and decided to observe instead of ignore, I changed the course of our lives forever. It was one of the most difficult decisions I've ever made, but also one of the most correct. Today, Owen is a wiser, stronger man who is more aware of his own worth. He is no longer the victim of professional manipulators, but someone who has learned to set healthy boundaries and to value his own generosity enough not to allow it to be exploited. And I, Adeline Thorne, at 69 years old, learned that it's never too late to be brave, to stand up for what's right, and to protect those we love. Because in the end, the most powerful justice isn't the one that shouts, but the one that acts with wisdom and protects those we love most. 2 years have passed since that afternoon at the grocery store that changed our lives forever. As I write these lines, sitting in my favorite armchair with a cup of tea that is already getting cold, I can't help but reflect on all the ground we have covered since then. Owen got married again 6 months ago. His new wife, Regina, is a hardworking and honest woman he met at his office. What I like most about her isn't just her transparency in everything she does, but the way she respects the relationship I have with my son. She has never tried to interfere between us or shown the slightest interest in our family finances. The first time Regina came to my house for dinner, she brought the ingredients for us to cook together. Adeline, she told me as we prepared the vegetables, I want you to know that I will never ask you or Owen for money. I believe in working for what I need and being honest about what I can afford. Her words moved me to tears, not only for her honesty, but because I realized how traumatized I had been by the experience with Sienna. For months after the divorce, every time we met someone new, I would find myself analyzing their motivations and looking for signs of manipulation. The healing process was not easy for either of us. Owen went through periods of depression where he questioned his judgment in relationships. There were nights when he would call me asking if he could ever fully trust anyone again. Mom, he would tell me during those late-night calls, how can I be sure I won't be deceived again? How can I distinguish between someone who truly loves me and someone who only sees opportunity? Those conversations broke my heart because I saw how Sienna's betrayal had damaged not only his finances, but his fundamental ability to trust people. But I was also proud to see how he was slowly rebuilding his confidence in a more mature and wiser way. I was paying for a cake at the grocery store when the cashier, an older man in his 60s, suddenly took my arm. His eyes held an intensity that made me uncomfortable, and he leaned in to whisper something in my ear. His words hit me like an unexpected blow, something about my son and his family that left me completely paralyzed. I couldn't believe what I had just heard. The man let go of my arm and continued scanning groceries as if nothing had happened. But I stood there, the receipt trembling in my hand, trying to process the words that were now swirling in my head. I walked out the back entrance of the store. I needed fresh air and time to think. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Was it possible that what this stranger had told me was true? Or was it just a misunderstanding from someone who didn't really know my situation? I decided to hide behind some trash dumpsters near the parking lot. From there, I could observe without being seen. If what I had heard was true, I would soon know it with my own eyes. My name is Adeline Thorne. I'm 67 years old, and all my life, I've worked hard to keep my family together. I live alone in a small apartment downtown on a pension that barely covers the basic bills. Every month, I count the dollars several times before deciding what to spend them on, always prioritizing the needs of others before my own. My only son, Owen, married Sienna 3 years ago. From the beginning, I found her to be a bit distant, but I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt, thinking it might just be shyness. Over time, however, I started to notice strange things about her behavior, though I never said anything because I didn't want to create conflict in my son's marriage. Sienna's family had always been very cordial with me, especially her father, Leonard. But there was something in their eyes that didn't sit right with me. They were always talking about how difficult their financial situation was, how they struggled to make ends meet, and without hesitation, I would try to help them when I could. From my hiding spot, I had a perfect view of the grocery store's main entrance. Owen was waiting for me in the car, but now I had a clear sight of everything. The cashier's words echoed in my mind over and over again like an unceasing sound. Barely 2 minutes had passed when I saw something that made me doubt everything I thought I knew about my daughter-in-law's family. Leonard, Sienna's father, walked out the main entrance carrying bags that looked quite heavy, but they weren't ordinary grocery bags. They were from a high-end store I only knew by sight, a place I had never had the resources to shop at. The store's name shimmered in gold on the black bags he carried with a casual ease, as if it were a perfectly normal thing for him. My heart began to beat faster. Leonard walked to a car parked just a few feet from where I was hiding. It wasn't the old, worn-out car they always complained about when asking for help. It was a brand new, gleaming vehicle, a light color that shone under the afternoon sun. The tires looked brand new, and the paint didn't have a single scratch. I watched him open the car's trunk and carefully place the bags inside like someone protecting something valuable. Then he took out his phone and started talking to someone. Although I couldn't hear the conversation, his body language was relaxed like that of a person with no urgent financial worries. At that moment, I remembered all the times Sienna had called Owen asking for help. It was always the same story. They couldn't pay the rent. They needed help with Leonard's medical expenses. They couldn't afford enough food for the week. And my son, with his kind heart, always found a way to send them something. But what I was seeing with my own eyes didn't match those stories of desperate need at all. The expensive bags, the new car, Leonard's relaxed demeanor, everything seemed to completely contradict the version they had been telling us for months. A cold sensation began to spread through my body, like when you sense that something very bad is about to happen. The cashier's words were starting to make sense, though I still resisted believing them completely. Could it be possible that my daughter-in-law's family had been lying to us this whole time? Leonard ended his call and headed back towards the grocery store entrance. He seemed to be looking for something or someone. His eyes scanned the parking lot carefully, as if to make sure no one had seen him. That cautious attitude seemed very suspicious to me. I decided to stay hidden a little longer. My gut told me there was more to discover, and after what I had seen, I couldn't simply ignore the situation. I needed to be completely sure before I talked to Owen about this. As I remained hidden, I began to remember how I had gotten to this point. That morning, I had woken up with a mix of excitement and nervousness. It had been months since I had visited Sienna's family, and I wanted to make a good impression by bringing something special to share. I went to my small kitchen and opened the jar where I kept my savings. Counting those coins had become a painful but necessary ritual. I separated the wrinkled bills and coins I had been saving for weeks, sacrificing small pleasures like a coffee at the bakery or a magazine at the newsstand. I had exactly $43. It wasn't much, but I had decided to use 20 of it to buy a decent cake at the neighborhood bakery. The rest I needed for my expenses the next week, mainly to buy my medications and some basic groceries. I showered with care and chose my best dress, the one I saved for special occasions. It was a simple but clean dress that made me feel presentable. I styled my hair, trying to hide the gray strands that were more noticeable every day, and put on the fake pearl earrings my late mother had given me so many years ago. Before leaving, I looked at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. I saw a 67-year-old woman who had worked her whole life, who had raised her son alone after being widowed, and who was now trying to keep a family together that seemed to value money more than feelings. Owen arrived to pick me up exactly on time. My son had always been punctual, a quality I admired in him. When I got in his car, I noticed he seemed a little tense, but I thought maybe it was nervousness about the family visit. During the ride, we talked about unimportant things. He told me about his office job, about some minor problems he'd had with his boss, but he avoided talking about Sienna or her family. That seemed strange to me, because he normally kept me informed about how things were going in his marriage. When we arrived at the area where Sienna's family lived, I asked him to stop at the grocery store. I wanted to buy a fresh cake to go with lunch. Owen offered to go in with me, but I told him I preferred to go alone, that I wouldn't belong. The bakery inside the grocery store had several cakes available. I chose a simple vanilla cake, nothing extravagant, but presentable. It cost exactly $18, $2 less than I had budgeted, which made me happy because it meant I could buy a small greeting card. It was also in the checkout line that everything happened. The cashier, a man who seemed to be my age, served me normally until he saw the name on the credit card I tried to use first. The card was rejected as I expected because I knew I didn't have sufficient funds. Then I took out the cash. It was at that moment that the man looked at me more closely, whispered my name, Adeline Thorne, and asked me if I was Owen's mother. When I confirmed that I was, his expression changed completely. He looked worried, almost scared. What he told me after grabbing my arm was something I will never be able to forget. Though at that moment, I refused to believe it. His words were direct and painful. He told me that my daughter-in-law's family came to that grocery store regularly, spending hundreds of dollars on imported products and premium meats, while at the same time he knew they were constantly asking my son for money. He explained that he knew the situation because Leonard had mentioned several times with a certain pride how my son helped them financially every month. The cashier told me he had seen Leonard buy bottles of wine that cost more than I spent on food for a whole week. He also told me that Sienna frequently bought expensive beauty products and designer clothes there, always paying in cash. He told me it seemed unfair that a family who gave themselves those luxuries was taking advantage of the generosity of a hardworking son and his elderly mother. The man explained that he had decided to talk to me because he had seen me carefully counting my coins to pay for a simple cake, while they spent without a care on luxury items. He told me that his own mother had gone through a similar situation, and that he regretted not having acted in time. After hearing this, I left the grocery store completely confused. My mind refused to fully process what I had heard. For years, I had trusted the word of Sienna and her family. I had watched my son worry about them, work extra hours to send them money, and I myself had contributed with the little I had on several occasions. But the cashier's words had planted a seed of doubt that was growing rapidly in my heart. That's why I decided to hide and observe. I needed to see with my own eyes if what I had been told was true, because the consequences of that information were too serious to act on based on rumors alone. From my hiding spot behind the dumpsters, I could see everything happening in the parking lot perfectly. The smell of garbage wasn't pleasant, but it was a small price I was willing to pay to discover the truth about the people I had trusted for so long. When I saw Leonard come out of the grocery store with those expensive bags, my heart tightened in my chest. The bags were from a store I knew only by its reputation for high prices. A single purchase there could cost me a whole month's grocery budget. Leonard walked with the confidence of someone who has no financial worries. His clothes were new, his shoes shined, and his watch looked expensive even from where I was. Nothing about his appearance suggested the desperate poverty they always talked about. The car he put the groceries in was definitely new. The paint gleamed under the sun, and the tires looked freshly bought. I mentally calculated that a vehicle like that could cost more money than I had seen put together in my whole life. How was it possible that someone who had a car like that would need constant financial help? As I watched him talk on the phone, I noticed that his conversation was relaxed, even cheerful. It didn't seem to be the call of someone worried about financial problems. His body language was that of a satisfied person, comfortable with his situation. At that moment, all the small inconsistencies I had noticed over the past few months began to make sense. The time Sienna had casually mentioned expensive restaurants where she had eaten, justifying it as invitations from friends. The comments about new clothes she had supposedly gotten on incredible sales. The social media photos that showed a lifestyle that didn't match their constant requests for help. Leonard ended his phone call and started walking back towards the grocery store entrance. His movements were confident, unhurried, like someone who had all the time in the world. That gave me the chance to analyze his appearance and behavior better from my hiding spot. Not only were his clothes new, but they were of good quality. The shirt he was wearing had that perfect cut you only get at specialty stores, and his pants were impeccably ironed. Even his shoes, which I could see better as he got closer to my position, seemed to be genuine and expensive leather. While I was waiting to see what else would happen, I heard voices coming from my right. Two elderly women were talking as they pushed their shopping carts toward their cars. At first, I didn't pay attention, but when they mentioned Sienna's name, my ears perked up immediately. "Did you see the new dress Sienna was wearing at the mall yesterday?" One of them, a woman with gray hair who looked my age, said. "It must have cost at least $200. I saw an identical one in that expensive store on the second floor." The other woman, who was thinner and wore glasses, responded with a knowing tone. "And that's not all, Hermione. I also saw her buying beauty products at that French store. My granddaughter works there, and told me that Sienna is a frequent customer. She spends as if money were raining from the sky." My heart started beating faster. These women were talking about the same Sienna, who constantly told my son they didn't have money for basic expenses. The same one who had called last week asking for help to buy medicine for her father. Hermione continued. "What strikes me most is how she's always buying new things, but then goes around the neighborhood saying they're going through very difficult financial times. My friend Leonard works at the bank and told me the deposits they receive don't match the story of poverty they're telling at all." "Oh, Hermione, but that's gossip," the other woman replied, though in a tone that suggested she had her own doubts. "Although, I must admit, it seems strange to me that they can afford the rent on that big house, if they're really as bad off financially as they say." Gossip. My daughter lives on the same block as them, and tells me that almost every week, delivery trucks with groceries from the most expensive grocery store in the city arrive. Purchases that any of us would take months to be able to afford. The two women continued walking away as they talked, but I could hear a few more fragments of their conversation. They mentioned something about parties Sienna's family had recently organized. Parties with abundant, high-quality food, imported wines, and expensive decorations. Every word I heard was like a stab in my heart. For months, I had been feeling sorry for that family, worrying about their well-being, asking my son to help them when he could, and even contributing my own small savings on several occasions. I remembered the time Sienna had called me directly, crying on the phone, telling me they needed urgent help to pay for Leonard's doctor. She had told me they had to choose between buying medicine or food, and that they didn't know what to do. That night, I couldn't sleep thinking about their suffering. The next day, I had gone to the bank and withdrawn $150 from my emergency savings, money I had been saving for a possible medical emergency of my own, but which I decided to give her because I couldn't bear the thought of them suffering when I could help. Now, listening to these women talk about that same family's luxurious lifestyle, I felt like the most foolish woman in the world. How could I have been so naive? How had I not seen the signs that were apparently obvious to the whole neighborhood? Leonard came out of the grocery store again, this time with a smaller bag. He headed back to his car, but this time he stopped to talk to a man who was washing a car near his. I couldn't hear the conversation, but they both seemed relaxed and friendly. The man Leonard was talking to wore work clothes, but you could tell he respected Leonard. His body language suggested that Leonard was someone of a certain status in the neighborhood, someone who commanded respect, possibly because of his financial situation. After a few minutes, I saw Leonard hand the man something. From my distance, it looked like money. Several bills that he handed over without apparent effort. If they were truly going through financial difficulties, as they said, how could he afford to give money to strangers so easily? At that moment, my phone vibrated. It was a text message from Owen asking me what had happened, why I was taking so long at the grocery store. I had completely forgotten about him, still waiting for me in the car, probably worried about my delay. I quickly replied that I was on my way out, that I had been in a very long line. A lie. Lying to my own son hurt, but I needed more time to process everything I had seen and heard. I couldn't get back to his car and tell him my suspicions immediately without more evidence. As I was writing the message, Leonard said goodbye to the man and got into his car. The engine started with a smooth, powerful sound, confirming that it was a good quality and probably recent vehicle. I watched him leave the parking lot with a tranquility that completely contrasted with the image of financial desperation his family had been projecting. I decided to leave my hiding place and walk toward where Owen was. I needed to act normally, at least for now, but my mind was already working, trying to recall all the strange details I had overlooked in recent months. All the small signs that now took on a completely different meaning. When I got to the car, Owen looked at me with concern. "Mom, are you okay? You look pale," he said as I settled into the passenger seat. "Did it take them a long time to check you out?" "Just the line, son," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "You know how grocery stores are on weekends." But inside, my heart was beating so hard I was afraid he could hear it. Owen started the car, and we began heading to Sienna's family's house. During the ride, I tried to keep up a normal conversation, but my mind was still processing everything I had seen and heard at the grocery store. Every traffic light, every corner we passed brought me closer to a meeting I now saw in a completely different light. "How's Leonard's job been lately?" I asked my son, trying to sound casual. Last time I spoke to Sienna, she said things were very difficult for him. Owen sighed as he drove. "Yeah, Mom. Sienna told me her dad had to reduce his work hours because the company he works for is having problems. That's why we've been helping them a little more these past few months." That information didn't match at all the relaxed and prosperous attitude I had observed in Leonard just a few minutes earlier. A man who was truly worried about reduced work hours wouldn't be spending money at expensive stores or handing bills to strangers in a parking lot. "And how do you feel about that, son?" I asked, watching his expression in the rearview mirror. "I know you've been working a lot of extra hours lately." "Well, Mom, they're my family now," Owen replied in a tone that mixed tiredness with resignation. "Sienna is my wife, and when you get married, you also marry into the family. If they need help, it's my duty as a son-in-law to help them." His words broke my heart. My son, the kind and hard-working man I had raised, was sacrificing his own well-being for people who, from what I had discovered, were taking advantage of his generosity. How much longer could this situation continue without seriously affecting his own financial stability? We arrived at the neighborhood where Sienna's family lived. It was a pleasant residential area with well-maintained houses and manicured lawns. It wasn't the most luxurious neighborhood in the city, but it was definitely not a place where people living in extreme financial difficulties would reside. As Owen looked for a place to park, I was able to get a better look at Sienna's family's house. It was a 2-story building with a well-decorated front lawn and a facade that had been recently painted. The windows had new curtains, and the front door looked like it had been renovated not long ago. "The house looks very well kept," I commented, trying to get more information. "Didn't you tell me they were having trouble paying for some repairs?" "Oh yeah," Owen replied as he parked. "Leonard managed to get some extra work on weekends to make the most urgent repairs. He's been working a lot to keep the house in good condition." Another story that didn't add up. If Leonard were really working extra shifts to survive, how would he have time to go grocery shopping at an expensive store during work hours? And more importantly, How would he have money to spend on luxury goods if everything he earned was supposedly going to house repairs? We got out of the car and walked to the front door. Owen was carrying some things he had brought while I carried my cake, and a mix of nervousness and curiosity that grew with every step. Before we could ring the doorbell, the door opened and Sienna appeared with a radiant smile. My first impression was one of total shock. Her appearance was completely transformed from the last time I had seen her just a month ago. She was wearing a dress that was definitely not cheap. The fabric looked to be of excellent quality. The cut was perfect, and the vibrant colors gave her an elegant and sophisticated look. Her shoes were clearly new with a shine that only freshly bought items have, and her handbag matched the outfit perfectly. But what struck me most was her hair and makeup. She had a professional cut that you only get at expensive salons with highlights that shimmered in the sunlight. Her makeup was flawless, the kind that requires high-quality products and a lot of time to apply correctly. "Adeline, what a joy to see you," Sienna exclaimed, coming in for a hug. As she embraced me, I could smell her perfume, a costly fragrance I recognized because I had once seen its price at a store, and it seemed equivalent to my €2 food budget. "Hello, Sienna," I managed to say, trying to hide my surprise. "You look great. That dress is beautiful." "This old dress," she replied with a laugh that seemed a little forced. "I bought it on a clearance sale months ago. You know how it is. When you find good deals, you have to take advantage of them." That explanation sounded exactly like the one the woman at the grocery store had mentioned. There was always a justification for every expensive item. Incredible deals, gifts from friends, second-hand purchases that looked new. How many extraordinary coincidences could one family have? We went into the house and I immediately noticed other details that didn't fit with the story of financial difficulties. The living room had been recently redecorated. The furniture wasn't the same as I remembered from my last visit. There was a new leather sofa that looked expensive, a glass coffee table that gleamed impeccably, and several decorative objects that were definitely not cheap. On the wall was a large flat-screen TV that hadn't been there before. It was a recent model, one of those that cost several thousand. How could a family in a financial crisis explain the purchase of a luxury television? "Dad, look who came to visit," Sienna called towards the inside of the house. Leonard appeared from what seemed to be the kitchen, wiping his hands with a towel. When he saw me, his expression changed slightly. There was a flicker in his eyes, as if for a moment he had seen something he didn't expect, but he quickly regained his usual smile. "Adeline, so good to see you," he said, approaching to greet me. "We hope you're hungry because Sienna has prepared a delicious meal." It was the same Leonard I had seen at the grocery store just an hour before, but now he was acting as if he hadn't left the house all day. His clothes were the same, but he had put an apron over his shirt, as if he had been cooking. "I brought a cake to go with it," I said, handing him the box. "I hope you like it." "What a lovely gesture," Sienna exclaimed. "But it wasn't necessary, Adeline. You know you're always welcome here without having to bring a thing." As she spoke, I could see over her shoulder into the kitchen. The counters were full of ingredients and utensils that suggested an elaborate culinary preparation. I could make out expensive-looking cuts of meat, fresh and exotic vegetables, and bottles of imported seasonings. The amount of food they were preparing could easily feed a family for several days, and the quality of the ingredients was noticeably superior to what I could afford to buy for my own meals. "Did you two prepare all this?" I asked, genuinely impressed by the abundance. "Well, we wanted to do something special for your visit," Leonard replied. "You don't get to have Owen's mother over every day. Besides, we got some ingredients on sale, so we decided to take advantage." Advantage? The miraculous sales again. I began to wonder if this family had an extraordinary knack for finding deals, or if these explanations were simply a way to justify expenses they couldn't honestly explain. Owen seemed completely oblivious to my observations. He was chatting animatedly with Sienna about his job and his plans for the next week. His relaxed attitude confirmed that he really believed the version of reality they had presented to him. But I could no longer ignore the evidence before my eyes. Every detail of that house, every aspect of Sienna's and Leonard's appearance, every convenient explanation, everything pointed to the same unsettling conclusion. This family was not going through the financial difficulties they claimed to be facing. During lunch, I tried to maintain a normal conversation while discreetly observing every detail that could confirm or disprove my suspicions. The table was set with dinnerware I didn't remember seeing before, plates and glasses that seemed to be of good quality, not the kind of utensils someone worried about every penny would use. The food they served was abundant and varied. There were several main courses, elaborate salads, and side dishes that required expensive ingredients. Leonard poured wine into crystal glasses, a wine I recognized from having seen its price at the grocery store, more than $50 a bottle. "This wine is delicious," I commented, trying to get information. "Is it a special brand?" "Oh, this one," Leonard replied with a proud smile. "A friend of mine who works in imports got it for me at a special price. Normally, we couldn't afford wines like this, but when these opportunities come up, you have to take advantage." There was always a perfect explanation, always a generous friend or an incredible deal that justified every luxury. I was starting to wonder how many generous friends one family could have, and how frequent those extraordinary deals could be. While we ate, Sienna casually mentioned some plans they had for the next month. She talked about a family celebration they were organizing, an event that, as she described it, would require a considerable investment in decorations, food, and entertainment. "Sounds expensive," I said without thinking, my words slipping out. "Expensive?" Sienna laughed. "Well, we've been saving for this for months. Besides, Leonard got an extra job that will help us cover the expenses." I immediately remembered what I had seen at the grocery store just a few hours earlier. Leonard spending money as if he had no worries, buying luxury products, driving a new car. What was the truth about his work situation? "What kind of extra job did you get, Leonard?" I asked directly. For a moment, I saw an expression of discomfort cross his face, as if my question had caught him off guard, but he quickly regained his composure. "Weekend consulting," he replied vaguely. "Nothing too exciting, but it helps supplement the family income." His answer was so general it could mean anything or nothing at all. A man who was truly doing weekend consulting would probably talk with more specificity about his work, especially when the question came from his son-in-law's mother. During the conversation, I noticed that Sienna's phone was constantly vibrating. Every time she looked at the screen, she smiled in a way that seemed significant to me. At one point, when she thought no one was watching her, she replied to a message, typing quickly with a look of satisfaction on her face. "Everything okay with the phone?" I asked with apparent curiosity. "Oh, just some friends organizing a get-together for next week," she replied quickly, putting her phone away. You know how women are always planning something. But there was something about her expression that didn't convince me. The way she had smiled while reading the messages suggested that the content was more meaningful than simple social plans. After lunch, Leonard offered to show me some of the improvements they had made to the house. We walked through different rooms, and in each one, I noticed new or renovated elements. The floors had been recently polished, some walls had fresh paint, and several pieces of furniture had been replaced